All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Good to see everyone here. Kind of heading towards the end of the week, and maybe we'll find a part of that in the analogy here that our friend Greg Borowski is going to give us. Greg is a friend of the program, graduate of the program, and he wrote a column a couple, 2, 3 years ago now that caught my eye, and ever since that time, I've asked him to come and talk to groups like this. He could tell you a little bit more about the column, but the upshot was that he began training for a marathon, and in the course of his training for a marathon, started to see his community and his city through different pair of eyes as he was traversing every street and neighborhood and town at a different speed and from a different angle. And of course, there's the part of the analogy of this sort of long distance thing that a marathon is, and pacing yourself and having key moments and so forth. And so he's talked to groups like this about how there's a lot of kind of comparisons to leading a newsroom in there. And so I'm going to ask Greg to introduce himself. He's had every job under the sun in journalism, so I'm not going to read off the CV, but he's been in pretty much every one of our shoes at one point or another. And just wanted you to hear from him. So, Greg, all yours.
All right, thanks. Glad to do this, and thanks for having me with you guys today. I just want to give you the real basics on my career because it's probably similar to other folks on this call. I started out after college at the Gannett paper in Marion, Indiana, which actually is no longer with the company. Worked there for 3 years, went to Lansing, Michigan, where I covered state government for 6 years, came home to Milwaukee, where I covered city government for about 10 years. Then moved into a management role, first as an enterprise editor and then head of our watchdog and projects team. And somewhere along the way in there, Journal Communications became Journal Media Group, which then became Gannett. I remember telling Bob Dickey when he came to visit us, I said, if you guys really wanted me back this badly, you could have saved a few $1 million and just hired me and didn't have to go through the whole merger thing. But I've been in management now for, I think about 12 or 14 years. And I've been a runner for a lot less time than that. We'll get into that as we go through this. I just want to mention a couple things as we get started. First, in the title, it's management is a marathon, not editing is a marathon. A lot of times I think we focus more when people get these editing jobs on the journalism and the editing, and I could certainly do a seminar, as you all could, on writing strong leads and nut graphs and things. So this is really today more about the people side of the equation and how you can function in that role more so than, here's all the journalism stuff that we do. And often people get promoted because of the journalism stuff and maybe have to learn a little bit more on the management side of the equation. So it's my metaphor for some of the things that I've learned. There could be a lot of other ways to approach this. Someone could be doing a management as like tending a garden or whatever their other hobbies are. This is just how I understand it. So not every comparison may be perfect, but I think there'll be some good things to pick up because we know management can be grueling, it can be exhilarating, it can be intimidating. Sometimes it's a little painful. Ultimately, it's rewarding. We know it's a long-term thing. This isn't management as a sprint. And we know it requires you to put in the work. And the more that work that you do, the closer you get to mastering it. And that's where I think this presentation fits in. As I said before, I'm not a lifelong runner. I ran track in high school, got back in shape periodically over the years. At one point, I famously in our newsroom overheard a conversation of another reporter who was saying she was thinking about running a marathon. And I said very loudly, I would never do that. And someone else asked, so you would never run a marathon? And I said, I would never think about running a marathon. And in fact, I might not even thinking about running a marathon. But now that was many years and 6 marathons ago. So I think I picked up a few things on the way. So I'm going to sort of jumping into this here. See if I can click the next. So the first thing here is just a basic starting point. If you run, you're a runner. And by that, I mean, we hear a lot about imposter syndrome. You may not feel like, boy, am I a manager? Am I really set up for this? Can I do this? How am I here? How did I get here? if you run, you're a runner. So, I mean, you might be able to picture, here's people you think are runners, and you might have a certain idea of what that runner looks like in your mind. But really, the first starting point here is get past any thoughts of imposter syndrome. If you're doing this job, if you're managing, you're a manager, right? Now, that doesn't mean that that you've perfected the technique or you've learned everything there is to learn about it. It doesn't mean that there aren't challenges or that you're not going to improve and that there aren't real specific ways to improve. It just means that you're worthy of being here and you're worthy of the chance, and then you should do the the right things within that to really advance yourself, and that's what kind of part of what we're talking about today. When you set out to do a marathon, you need a plan, as you do in so many things in management. It requires a roadmap that's very realistic and thoughtful. In general, it would, you build up shorter runs to longer runs. Every run, and this is really what I'm emphasizing here, has a purpose. Okay, you don't want to run a lot of what gets termed sometimes as junk miles. So it's not like you just out there running. You might be running a distance in order to build up your speed, or you might be running a longer distance to build up your endurance, or you might be running some different types and paces to try to amplify your effort and to improve. So you should have certainly your own plan in terms of into management, but on a day-to-day basis, what's your plan for getting where you want to go? And sometimes if you think about it, and I do this sometimes, if you the technique of putting a quadrants and put a square on the lines across the square on a paper page, and you have, say, here's the most urgent and most important and in one quadrant, and least urgent and least important in another quadrant, and you kind of start to conceptualize your day and what you're working on and what you have to do. You don't want to spend a lot of time in that least urgent, least important quadrant. That's what I would call kind of the junk miles, that you're just out there. I mean, there's value, of course, just getting out and running, but if you're working toward a goal in a marathon, you need to be really more focused than that. Go ahead. Now, the corollary to that is you have to be willing to vary that plan too. You're going to have circumstances that come up where you need to do what's best for you and for your team at the time. Now, it might be that there's pouring down rain and you don't want to get out there in that. It might be up here in Milwaukee because we train for marathons and things in the winter too. There might be a lot of snow. There might be a lot of issues that come up that you didn't anticipate, and that's part of just rolling with what you're doing as a manager. If you feel like, boy, I had this thing planned, it was going to happen on Monday and it didn't happen, and now the whole week's off, or you just got to be a little willing to adapt and roll with it. And I have a quick sub note here on this that I should have probably made its own slide, but sometimes in a running situation, what is causing you to adapt is you might be feeling pain, or you're not listening to your body. And I'll give an example where a couple of years ago, I kept having issues with my knee while I was running, and everyone said, well, just take a rest. And I would rest for a week, and the knee would feel fine, and I'd get back out, run some more, and it would flare up again. And I finally realized that I was diagnosing the symptom and not the problem, and that the real problem was I hadn't changed out my shoes on time and had sort of this bad set of shoes. So I needed to really distinguish that. First, pay attention to what was going on to try to address it. But second, figure out, am I diagnosing the problem or the symptom? And I'll give one quick example on that just popped up here yesterday. For us, we had one of our reporters in our suburban department, write a story about assuming a very innocuous sounding story about a man who had just started he was like one of these YouTube figures with a big following, who had started a coffee company online on the side. And we got a message from a different reader saying, do you know about this guy? Because here's all of these, racist, homophobic, misogynistic statements he's made. It looks like the guy might be a white supremacist. What are you doing about that? And it was an opportunity where, yes, we got frustrated. Why didn't we know this? Why didn't we do these background checks before going up? We didn't respond with a, dang it, reporter, what the hell were you doing? We stop and say, well, what is the problem here? Is the problem here that we've got a lot of new reporters who aren't familiar with the idea of backgrounding all of your sources? Is it a case where people were trying to hustle to do a quick turn trending story when they didn't need to hustle? And this is just, you know, one example there, and I realize I'm a little off point from this particular slide, but where it was a case of, you know, the immediate thing that came to mind could have been, let's go solve that problem and yell at that reporter and get it fixed. And really what we realized, I think, is we have to do some better training and things to affect and influence all of the reporters who are in that scenario. So it's sort of just one way to think about it when you have issues that come up. You know, listen to them, pay attention to them, don't ignore them, and then try to figure out what is the real cause of what's going on. That's what's the underlying problem, not just the symptom that you might be seeing.
Hey, Greg, let me just say, there's over in the chat, there's like a dozen examples that people have given in their own management career about why they might have to change the plan. So I think they're picking up on the analogy just fine here.
Okay.
And folks, if you need to jump in and say something to Greg or ask, do so.
All right. Yeah, this one I think is really important in today's environment, especially in our hybrid newsrooms with Teams meetings and everything else, where there can be a million different things going on in management, or even as a reporter when someone who's not in management. But that doesn't mean you have to do them all at once, or that you should try to do all of them at once. You know, I think back to the glorious days when we used to be able to go into somebody's office and have a meeting, and people didn't come and knock on the door and ping you constantly with, you know, random questions that came up in the corner of the screen, which you felt compelled to respond to. And we didn't, you know, I didn't take my computer into a meeting with my boss and watch something else and do the work on the side while we talked. So this is the case where it's just run sometimes, where it's like, if I'm having a rough day, I get home in the evening and I just got out for a few miles. I mean, just do the one thing. And that's, you know, it can really make your day go better to just say, like, I'm going to clear off this time to do something. I often get to the end of the day and feel like I've got these 5 things that I have to get done. It would take me 10 minutes to do each one of them. But because I keep getting interrupted, I've spent the whole day trying to do them. So you deserve that. Your staff deserves that to be able to zero in on things. And that applies too if you're out talking to folks in the newsroom. One of the things I try to do is always, you know, if I'm just kind of making the rounds and chatting with people and there's a chair open next to them, I'm going to sit down and talk to them and not just sort of like be there constantly looking at the phone and my watch and trying to, you know, move on to the next person. It says a lot to people if you sit down and talk, or you close the laptop and you just get zeroed in on that issue at hand. For me, I always hate the first mile. I can be as prepped and stretched out and rested as possible. I always feel like the first mile is my slowest mile because I'm just getting into that mindset. And here I relate that a little bit to a lot of the bureaucratic work that comes with being a manager, to things that you just don't want to do, difficult conversations that you might want to put off and just say, well, let me do something different and procrastinate. I have never regretted, after starting that run, finishing the run, and it always gets better after you start. So this is just sort of my own mantra. Sometimes when I have something that I don't really want to do, or there's more pleasant things that I could be doing, if you just jump in and start, you know, rarely have I had a difficult conversation with someone that at the end I didn't feel better for having done it than having done it. I mean, yes, you got to get in and do it. And if you delay, that's rarely going to make it better for you. It's only going to make it more challenging. This is one that if I was fancier with PowerPoint, I would figure out a way to put like flashing lights around it. But this is really a mantra that I have and a lot of other runners do too, and that is, you know, run the mile you're in. And by that, I mean, focus on the here and the now, be in the present, not in the past or in the future. It's all about being centered and grounded if you're running a marathon, I mean, 26.2 miles is a lot of miles. And my goal has long been, I haven't quite made it to a 4-hour marathon, but that's a lot of time to be thinking. And if you've had a good mile at the start and you're worried about mile 17 because you know there's a lot of hills, or you had a bad mile at mile 3 and you're worried about all that's ahead, you're not doing yourself any favors. You're really missing the moment where you are, and it doesn't allow you to focus on, well, am I getting my stride right? Am I fueling properly? Am I drinking the water that I need? You're worried about too many other things. And here I would liken it to how in a day, it's really so easy to get off your stride by a bad email from a reader, a bad email from your supervisor, a complaint that wasn't expected, all these sorts of things that just pop in. And I'm tempted often, like, okay, that email came in from a reader and I know they don't have a point and I know I could just fire off a quick response. But if I do that right away, it's probably going to be a negative response. And it's going to affect me for the next half hour as I just stew about it. So it's really just zero in on where you are. And like I said, the phrase is sort of run the mile you're in and not worry too far ahead or regret everything that happened, in the last hour or two behind you. In a marathon especially, but in management as well, I think you have to put in the work on a day-to-day basis, especially in a training situation. There's all sorts of workouts and cross-training exercises. In management, I view this as you have to do all of the little things. There isn't a lot of, if you're going to be effective as a manager, there's not a lot of shortcuts here. And those little things might be, taking time to talk with your employees, knowing when people have a birthday, knowing when you sometimes I just have a feel for something's wrong with that, something's going on with that reporter, because I know normally they would behave a certain way, or they'd be more active, or, just in how they engage with people. So if you are putting in that time and work on things like, making sure they have good, strong evaluations and feedback, making sure you recognize successes, making sure you're out and about and communicating with people, you're going to have a much better feel for how things are going in the broader term, and really to get in that work. There's no question it's a lot of work to be a manager. And when I ran my first marathon, this was back in 2017. I had a chart. I checked off every workout and every run all the way to get there, tracked it. I even had a friend, Danielle, who jumped in at mile 14 to run a few miles in there with me. And, you put in all that work, and you just have to do it. There's no getting around it. There's no shortcut there. Set a big goal, but have backups. In running, sometimes I talk about setting an A goal, a B goal, and a C goal. So my goal on that first marathon was to if everything went well, I wanted to beat the 4-hour barrier on the marathon, and things were going great. And I ran the fastest half marathon I'd ever run, and that first half was about 1 hour and 48 minutes. So in my mind, I've got 12 minutes to spare. Done the second, so it's like banking the time. So the second half of the marathon, I can run each mile, a minute slower or so. What's left times to make it. I had at about mile 18, terrible calf cramps, or similar, like a Charlie horse kind of cramps that were just debilitating, and I had to stop. Fortunately, my friend Danielle was with me because she knew she had run marathons before. I was like, here's what you need to do to try to work them out. But that's where my second goal and my other goals came in, of like, well, if I can't do 4 hours, well, I'm gonna, okay, let's recalibrate that to, 4 hours and 15 minutes, or my goal is to not stop the rest of the way, or whatever the goals are. But it's important, I think, in all of this to know what's your fallback if things start to go wrong, so you can keep moving forward. And that leads us to the next slide here, that slow progress is still progress. And I think we don't always recognize that, because we're figuring we've got to get this done on this timetable, and if it didn't work, we're somehow failing. But slow progress is still progress. Sometimes you may not always like it, but you're moving ahead. And in that race, that marathon I just described, I missed my goal. I came in at 4 hours and 3 minutes or so. So I felt like, boy, if I'd only didn't have to stop one less time, I might have made it. But even after 5 other marathons, it's still my fastest marathon, and it, all depends on how you look at it. But on a day-to-day basis, you might have a major goal of, we've got to get digital subscriptions up to a certain point, and you're frustrated because you haven't hit that goal. Still remember, if you're making progress toward it, that's still something. It's not, may not be what you want, but it's not nothing. And sometimes we put ourselves in this all or nothing category of, well, I didn't make the 4-hour barrier. It's like, well, I also ran the fastest marathon that I've run, even if, so it's a success from a different measuring stick. By even effort, what I mean is that, using the marathon analogy again, of course, and if you've got lots of hills and ups and downs and these different things along the way. And, some people are like, they want to run an even pace, and they figure, well, even though this is the hilliest part of the marathon, I've got to run the same pace I'm going to run during the flattest part of the marathon. And the philosophy here is, you can't always control what's going on around you, be that, breaking news that pops up, problems in the economy, layoffs, departures, all these different things that you can't control that are outside factors, but you can control your effort. And the idea being, if you're going to be running up that hill, don't feel like you've got to go in the same pace you were running at before. You want to provide the same effort. You might wind up going a little slower, but that hill's going to turn at some point, and it's going to go downhill, and you'll have an opportunity there where with less effort, you're going to be going faster. And it's really just a mindset kind of thing where sometimes you can be working very hard and the miles just aren't coming easy. Other times the miles are going to be seemingly flying past, and it's not always on you and your effort. There's different things going on in the environment that affect how fast you're able to work and what you're able to do. This one, sometimes you get red flagged in the running world. There's a green flag means that everything's perfect and fine for running. Yellow flag means conditions are deteriorating. Red flag means it's kind of dangerous, and black flag means it's canceled. Red flagged was the Chicago Marathon last fall, which was one where I was really looking at to figure it's a pancake flat course. I had done all of my training. I really felt like this was the chance to get under the 4-hour barrier. And we woke up that morning. It was, 70 plus degrees at 6 a.m., 85+% humidity. A couple friends and I were running it. One, I was running with my friend Liz. We got to after the first mile, and she said to me, she looks at me, she goes, "Are you really sweating? Because I'm really sweating." And I said, "Yeah, this is terrible." And that went from yellow flag to red flag at about, mile 14, slowed everybody down. I reached the halfway point. So we stopped for water. I was starting to feel dizzy. There was walking that came in after that. And my point in bringing this up is just that sometimes it gets so bad it's out of your control, and what you can do is the best you can with what you have, and that's really what all that anyone can expect from you in those circumstances. In this case, I recalibrated my goals, and I was going to finish that marathon somehow. and I wanted to finish it before it went to a potential black flag. So I kept myself moving. And it came in just under 5 hours, but I finished it. And it just kept reminding me of the idea that, the old joke on what do you call the person who finishes last in their medical school class? And the answer is doctor. And you're still a finisher. You made it through. You've probably learned some things along the way about yourself, but when things just are out of your control, they're out of your control, and accept that and do the best you can with what's there. This one doesn't need to spend a lot of time on this, but there's always a next race, right? I mean, I retired about 16 or 17 times during that Chicago marathon, and was just determined, this is it. 6 is a nice number. I don't need more than 6. But by the time we came back on the train from Chicago that night, ready to go, well, that's not how I want to end this thing. I'm going to end it on a better race. A couple friends of mine and I are running a marathon in Duluth, Minnesota in June. And then if you were on at the very start, I got into the New York City lottery. So I'll be doing that in November. But it's an opportunity to stop, evaluate what went wrong, what could you have done better, move on, and get ready to try the next thing. Race against yourself. I mean, in any race, marathon or otherwise, you're always like, you see the people next to you and you kind of go, I want to beat that person, I want to beat that person. You're kind of measuring yourself against your friends, against your colleagues, against others. In running especially, it just gives you an opportunity. I know if I did better on this marathon than the last one because of the time, of my own time, and did I do better or not? And you can measure your own progress. And that's really a way to think about it, rather than, hey, that person over there, they're getting more credit. They're doing things a little faster. Why can't I do it like them? In running, and a key part of it is you want to always do better yourself. Is your form stronger? Are you feeling better? Are you making fewer mistakes? Same with your newsroom. Are you getting sharper at covering breaking news? Are you better off today than you were a year ago in terms of, obit a matter that you've squirreled away, or training programs, or whatever you have? You're racing against yourself, even though the temptation is to look at the next person and say, why is it so easy, or why are they going so fast, or so as a comparison. This is another one where if I could put the flashing lights on, I think I would, in that resting is part of the training, and it's really hard for runners and others, I think, to understand. If your personality is, I'm just going to charge in and keep doing that no matter what, and nothing's going to stop me, and I'm going to work from 6 in the morning till 10 at night, and I'm going to sign in on the weekends to catch up, you're actually hurting yourself. And I have a couple friends who've run a couple marathons, including one recently, who, it's like, we kept telling her, you got to stop, you got to rest a little bit. She didn't. She got injured, and really, missed out on that. So when I say it's part of the training, you got to build that into your plan. Give yourself some time to be away from the office. Give your employees some time to be away from the office. Don't expect that you've got to be going constantly. The hardest part of a marathon, sometimes say, is that it's getting to the start line, not getting to the finish line. And that, I think, really applies, and I can't stress this enough. I will even say I'm not the best example, because sometimes I push myself too hard and don't take the rest on the work side of things. But it's part of the training. You will go faster in the long run if you give yourself that break. It's nothing to be ashamed to take a day off, to take an afternoon off, to let someone else run that meeting. It gives them an opportunity to grow, and you may find at the end you're a stronger person. I mean, there is a biological, physical reason too that your muscles are getting stronger when you rest, because they're healing themselves. And if you don't give yourself that opportunity to rest, you miss out on that opportunity, and you push yourself closer to injury. This is one of those that seems real obvious, but I have a point with it, in that obviously you can't run in your office. I mean, you could. We actually have a new office building here at the Journal Sentinel where it's like a donut, so you could run around the whole newsroom if you wanted to. But what I wanted to bring up here was the story that Mackenzie referenced earlier, where several years ago at the start of the pandemic, I had decided to train for the Milwaukee Marathon, which was in April of 2020. And I did it in part because a friend of mine got into this, Danielle, who I mentioned earlier, got into the Paris Marathon, which was on the same schedule, and we could do the training, and I figured I would just run this race. Well, the Milwaukee Marathon got canceled because of COVID. I decided that Saturday morning, even though I had sort of fallen off on my training, that, you know what, I'm just gonna get out there and run and see how far I can get. I ended up completing a solo marathon, not on the route, because I sort of took my own route and got out through where I grew up and where I went to school and different places that I just wanted to see. And it gave me an opportunity to, see the community in a different way. We often, as my friends and I are out running, take different routes, vary things. I was amazed one time just because we did one route in a kind of backwards, and we had been talking in the newsroom about a Giannis Antetokounmpo mural in the neighborhood or in the community. I said I had never seen that, and actually I'd run past it like day to day, but it wasn't until I turned around and ran in the other direction that I realized, oh, that's where that is. So it's sort of the idea here is, get out of your literal office and into the newsroom, and out of your newsroom and out into the community, talk to people, hear what they have to say. You have to get out and about and vary your routine. It might be as simple as drive home through a different route. Don't be on autopilot. Drive through different neighborhoods of the community. You're going to see different things that might lead to ideas and help ground you in them. I have just a couple other ones here. This one, find your crew. I started running through a Couch to 10K program, became good friends with another runner, Anne, who was on the same sort of journey. We finished the the 10K program, and then decided we were just going to keep adding miles in the fall, got up to nearly a half, and then we decided to do the full. But we've helped then build out a group of about a dozen different people or more who run at various points, and what we call the Bayview Run Group here in Milwaukee. And the nice thing about it is we've got people of all different backgrounds, all different speeds. You have some you might think of as your running peer because they're kind of at your level of speed and distance. But there's others that if you run with, well, they're going to be a little faster. And if you're running with them, it's going to really encourage you and challenge you to go forward. And there's going to be some that are a little maybe slower, and then it's like, who can you help up their game, even if you stop and run with them. And there's a mantra in running that I don't have in here, but it's that sometimes you have to go slow in order to go fast. And that by that it means, if you're running a slower pace for the same amount of time over that distance, it's really still building out your capacity to run more. And in a newsroom environment that run slow to run fast might be, you've got a reporter you're challenging and they want to do a project, and you maybe pick something for them to do that doesn't have a super tight deadline or doesn't have a lot of risk behind it if they can't get it done in the window, to really give them the chance to go through the basics and understand here's how a project works, and here's who you engage, and here's how you dig deeper, and here's how you go back and ask more questions. And so you might be going slow in order to get fast. But the main point on this slide is, who's your crew? And it may be people on this call who've gone through this program with you. It might be people in your newsroom who are at your management level who you can commiserate with. It might be people who've moved ahead and are kind of mentoring you, or maybe someone, you may be mentoring someone else, but you really want to be looking around to see in your group, what can you do to help others and who can help you. Because as just noted here, you don't get there on your own. People think of running as sort of this solitary thing. When I finished my first marathon, I thought back about all the people who had contributed along the way, and it wasn't just people who ran with me. It was, my wife and daughter. It was the coaches at the gym. It was a whole lot of people, and that's just important to remember as a manager that it's not your success that matters, it's your team's success. And it's important to be recognizing folks who've contributed to that, and not feel like you're on an island either if things go bad, or if you're on an island if things go well. After that first marathon, I wrote a note to every coach at the gym that I go to and others, and just thanked them for what they had done to help lift me to get me to that point at the end. I have one other slide here, and then looks like we'll have some good time for questions. This is another one of those kind of big ones for me and others, that the marathon, it doesn't owe you anything. Okay, sometimes it's easy to go say, like, going into Chicago, I'm due. I'm due for a great marathon. The weather's going to be right, and then you get frustrated if it's not. But you just have to have the attitude that you're not cocky, you're not overconfident, you're going to stay humble, or you're going to be humbled. And I'll give an example here of the Madison Marathon, which is one that I did a couple years ago. It was kind of back to back. We were about 4 weeks out of, I'd done the Lakefront Marathon in Milwaukee. A friend of mine, Liz, couldn't do that one. She had a family conflict, and she wanted to do one that fall. So she said she has to do Madison, which is about 4 or 5 weeks later. And I said, okay, I'm going to just stay trained up, and I'm going to do it with you. And it was fine, because I felt like my expectations were lower, because I wasn't going for the 4-hour mark, because it was unlikely after you had just done one a few weeks earlier. Instead, I said, no, I'm going to really focus in on trying to avoid these cramps that have plagued me in a lot of the marathons. And it's fueling and hydration and all these different things. And we had the best time going through this. We laugh about it all the time, because Madison is a lot hillier than I ever knew. I had been out there a few weeks prior, and someone at lunch said, "Oh, are you going to run on Observatory Hill on the campus of UW-Madison?" And I was thinking, like, God, I sure hope not. But that was mile 10 was Observatory Hill. Mile 18 was a subdivision that I swear it was uphill every street in that subdivision. I want to go back someday and view it, because I swear to God, it was, we came out of it on a hill. We kept thinking, okay, if we're going up a hill, it's going to go down, right? But through that marathon, I was fueling properly. We're pacing ourselves. I didn't overdo it. I didn't have any issues with my calf cramps. I just allowed myself to start thinking, this is going to be the one. I'm going to make it through. But literally at the mile 26 marker, so I'm 0.2 away from the end, I got the first seize up cramp, and I just sent Liz ahead, said, you got to finish this. I just paused a little bit, pushed up the hill, and got it done. But it just was mindful to me of, okay, don't even run the mile you're in, bud. Don't get ahead of yourself thinking this is done. You can be a little cocky and finish it out a different way, because that's where the humbling came in. I felt I was getting closer to getting it right, but then we had the pandemic and the Milwaukee Marathon, then Chicago. So now I'm hoping my next, A goal is the marathon in June, and then New York, that one of these we're gonna get it right. But it's also, I feel like if I ever master that marathon, maybe that's when I'll retire. So the marathon gods have, kept me in line, and the world has a way of doing that. So, stay focused on what's on your screens and your agendas, and that's better than getting ahead of yourself. And that's all I've got. And I'm happy to answer questions. If someone has any follow up, feel free to ping me on Teams or by email or whatever. And I don't know, Mackenzie, if you've got anything, or if there's anything in the chat, or what you
there's a lot going on in the chat.
Okay. All right.
Ask and glad to hear you'd consider retiring after the New York Marathon and not after mile 17. That's good. Danielle had a question about kind of battling through distractions And, you know, the hyper focus that you talked about, that's a high bar. That's not, everybody can't get to that all the time. Danielle, express, if you would, in your own words, what you want to hear from Greg or others on that.
Yeah, you had talked about, finding your stride and staying there and, staying focused, not getting distracted. But I think, just the demands of, people who, want your attention, need your attention. Sometimes it's harder. Some days it's harder to stay, there. So I was just wondering, when we do get distracted, how do we, do you have any tips on quickly, finding our stride again and getting back to that focus?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really tough, and you really pinpointed the challenge of it. So what I try to do is avoid getting off the stride in the first place if I can. So that might be, don't respond to email for that first hour of the day or whatever it is, so you can get something else done. Or, yeah, you saw that thing that came up, do a quick assessment. Is this something that's urgent and important, or is it, important but not urgent? Is it not urgent and not important at all? And can it wait? So you have to sort of do a mental triage of that, of what it is. And part of that is kind of knowing the newsroom, knowing the people who you're communicating with. Is it a case where you can just give a 2 or 3 word response on the Teams message, and that person's going to know what you mean and carry on, and you've just kept that piece moving forward? Or is it someone that that you really got to stop and sit down and walk through this thing? And that's the kind of assessment you have to make in that moment. I usually try to get myself going in the morning with a few easy things that I might have started the day before and just didn't finish. So I feel I can get something accomplished right away and get them out there. If I wasn't doing a session on management as a marathon, I would say management is plate spinning, like in the circus. That's my other favorite analogy is, you've got this, 8 or 10 plates or 20 plates, and you're spinning them and you're racing back and forth, and you're in the flow sometimes where you've got the right, you're just giving it enough spin to keep it going, and you can come back to it. Sometimes your manager comes in and adds 2 more plates that you weren't expecting, but you don't want to get in that spot of like, if this plate is just gonna crash if you don't get to it, maybe stop and spend more time on it, but give the others a little nudge along the way. And that's really kind of what you have to think about is that distraction, how necessary is it to jump in right away? How important is it? Is that plate going to crash if you don't? Is it the company's finest china, or is it, plates you got at Costco or something? And if it crashes, well, it's maybe not be a terrible thing. So I just different ways that I think about it sometimes.
That's good. And in a minute, we'll go to Adam. Just to follow up here, first of all, Greg, when you said sometimes your manager is going to add 2 more plates, every single head on the screen that I am looking at started nodding at the same time. So that sounds like a theme. Danielle, I know you saw this, but there's various sort of organizational systems out there. One called Take Back Your Life. That's relevant to what you're talking about, where they recommend they say that our brain works in different ways for different tasks. So like our email brain is different from our phone call brain, is different from our project that's going to get us into 3rd and 4th gear in our brain. And they actually talk about blocking off time on your calendar just for those modes. So it's not the task that I'm going to do between 8 and 9 a.m. It's that I'm going to do email between 8 and 9 a.m. because I'll be able to get my brain sort of in that same mode and do 15 emails and then just be done with it for whatever the next few hours. It's a thought. Okay, Adam in Georgia.
Oh, sorry there. I put it in the chat, but basically, to sum it up, I'm a bit of task oriented. It goes back to being a beat writer for many, many years. And of course, that helps you when you're working with reporters and others because you can relay that institutional knowledge. But at the same time, it can be kind of a grind, like with the plate analogy you were making. are there any secrets to kind of sensing when you need to get off of that to-do list? Don't worry about the to-do list and really focus in on helping your people and being a better leader.
Yeah, I mean, one, I often the same way. I have a list of things I have to get done during the course of the day, but part of what I do, this is as a practical matter, since I put on that list, talk to somebody. I mean, that's something that I'm checking it off because I feel like I'm making progress. It satisfies my own mental need that I'm, checking off this list. But, some of those things like, walk the newsroom, get out and, have a conversation with somebody, that can be part of your to-do list if you build it in just on a purely functionary practical level. But I would say usually days that I've noticed this more now that we're back at least somewhat in our newsroom, and we've got a good contingent that are in, and I try to pick the days that I'm in, because days when I have a ton of meetings, it sometimes makes sense to just be at home, because if I'm coming to their office and my door is closed, it's not helping anybody. It's giving them the impression that I'm not available. And if I'm just in and out, that's terrible. But I've never regretted, just taking the long way around the newsroom, stopping to talk to somebody, see what they're up to, just get some conversation. Often, there's, things that you're going to pick up by doing that you never will if you're just, checking off things on your list. That list, of course, has to be checked off. There's all those things that are not going to go away usually. I mean, my list from day to day usually gets longer, not shorter. But if you don't take that opportunity, you're never going to really develop that feel for the newsroom and the people who are working with you to be able to recognize, oh, that reporter's having a real problem, because because how they generally respond to things, or what their attitude is, if they somehow seem more flustered than normal or something. And if you can't diagnose that, then it's going to be hard to really address things, and you want to try to catch them ahead of time. Sometimes that the benefit of having those conversations is just, it can be, boy, I really stopped that story. That should never be done. or I hear you talking about that. That's interesting, but what about this way? And if you just got them on gear, that ultimately it'll come back and benefit you in the long run, because then you're able to guide and coach in that role rather than, sort of fix and address at the back end.
Great. Probably got time for one more if anybody wants to ask Greg about his journey. All right. Barring that, I'm going to put in the chat right now Greg's 2 gifts to you, and that is let's see, that is the deck he used and the notes he used. And, obviously no substitute for being here in the conversation, but I think good reference materials for everybody. Greg, thank you for putting in the time, for helping us get a little sharper, for helping us see our goals a little more clearly, for the analogy, for the marathon. I don't know that I'm ever going to go out and run one just yet, but then again, you said that a lot of times.
Well, not with that attitude, you won't, Mackenzie.
No, there you go.
That attitude.
Quite right. So anyway, we really appreciate you, and I appreciate everybody for being here, and we'll end a couple minutes early.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.